Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name's Julie Mann, and I help men and women lead healthy, happy, sustainable lives. And I'm really delighted because today I'm joined by Pamela Thompson. Hi, Pamela.
Hi, Julie. Thanks for inviting me. I'm very excited to be here.
It's really lovely to have you. So for those people that haven't yet met Pamela, Pamela works as an EFT practitioner. I know some of you might not know what that is, and also co-founder of Wellness Within. So Pamela, before we talk about that, let's start with your journey. And let's talk really about your childhood. Were you actually taught as a child to respect your well-being and have some understanding of what well-being was?
Well, no. And I think that's true for so many people. So I'm not unique in that. But my parents didn't have the tools nor the knowledge to know that some of the ways that they were raising their children were really hurting them emotionally. And eventually what that leads to physical issues as well. So I had a very domineering father, very patriarchal family, which was very common back in the years I was growing up, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So and I was the only girl of 5 children, so I had 4 brothers, and so I grew up feeling not valued, not that I was secondary, that my role was to stand behind a male, to do as I was told, not to think for myself. And I had a lot of thoughts. I had a lot of ideas, a lot of things I wanted to do, and I felt like I had no power to do them. So that's where I started. I can go on, but I don't know if you had another question.
Well, if you want to go on, you absolutely can. But did you feel at the time that that wasn't right? That somehow it wasn't okay?
I thought that's the way it was, that I did not have any options, that because I was female, that I was secondary. And I think intuitively I knew it wasn't right. I used to go around, especially as a young, as a teenager and then a young adult and newly married. I used to have this knot in my stomach it was a ball of anger, actually, is what it was. And it was more anger at not having the power that a male had. And I don't mean power to control people, but power to decide for yourself what your life would look like. I felt like I had to be either a teacher, a secretary, a nurse, and definitely a wife. And those were my options. And yet I had so much, I was very bright, very inquisitive. I had a lot that I felt I wanted to do. And I felt tied with that, tied and unable to do it. And I didn't know that I had choices. So that's how I felt. As I got older and I began to explore, well, one of the things, I'll have to go back, a friend and I were actually reading Wayne Dyer's very first book, Your Erroneous Zones. And I had an epiphany. It's as real today to me as it was then. Standing in the driveway waiting for my children to come home from school, reading his words and saying to forgive yourself and not feel guilty for what happened as a child, because you were dependent on those that were, your caregivers. And what happened then happened then. Now, as an adult, moving forward, you can make changes. You can be what you want to be. And I remember in that moment, because I had a lot of guilt, I had a lot of shame, I had a lot of anger, as I said. And I thought, wow, it wasn't my fault that all of this occurred to me. It's not who I really am. And then in the next thought, it was like, oh shit, I'm responsible for the rest of my life. I'm responsible for what I do. So that was really the very beginning of my journey. And so I did a lot of reading, a lot of self-help courses and studies, energy work. I did Reiki. I learned healing touch. I did some weird things called Octurian energy, which is fabulous, by the way. And then I got into mind body work and EFT. And that's when things really, really shifted for me. So, but there was that time before then that even though I had a wonderful husband, I had children that were great, a home, I had a job, but all of that inner stuff impacted the quality of those. It impacted my parenting. It impacted my relationships. It impacted my job. And it definitely impacted how I felt about myself. So
Absolutely. It's an inside job, isn't it, Pamela?
it is an inside job. And until I realized that it was all a blame outside of me, and that inner stuff, that inner sense of unworthiness and that inner anger could not be freed. So that's when, so yeah, you're right.
Amazing. Thank goodness for Wayne Dyer's book, that, you know, that epiphany that you had. Yes. And we all know that it's not about blaming parents, is it? Because they do the best they can with the resources they have. And mostly they just don't really have many resources, or at least back then when you and I were growing up, there weren't the resources that there are now. So before we kind of go into more about EFT, how about you talk us through your career path? Because you've had a very interesting career, haven't you?
Thank you. Yes, I actually have been an interpreter for the deaf. Interestingly, when I was in high school, I took French and Spanish, and I had decided I wanted to be an interpreter. And little did I know that down the road, I would also take American Sign Language. And that's what I would end up doing, is interpreting using American Sign Language. I also taught American Sign Language in the college level to hearing students who wanted to become interpreters. And I started out being an interpreter in a time when interpreters were just getting into the field, where there were no rules, there were no guidelines. And so it was like dive in and learn on the job. And that's what I did. I job shared with a friend of mine who we took turns taking care of each other's children and interpreting. And then I moved on to be working with a counselor who was deaf in the rehabilitation services, and then to the American School for the Deaf, where I actually worked with deaf individuals who also had life skill issues, which often come with that because they are so marginalized. That population is often marginalized. And a lot of my job at that time was educating employers on how to work with people who were deaf, because the whole concept was that deaf and dumb. So that was quite an experience that really opened up a lot for me. It's interesting because I say that learning sign language actually gave me a voice, which is an interesting thing when you think about it. I was very shy about speaking up because of the way I was brought up, and very reticent to share what I felt. Learning sign, there were so many people, hearing people that did not know what was being said, that enabled me to feel freer using the language. And it's kind of interesting, isn't it, that how our experiences kind of help us over hurdles, or put up hurdles, one or the other.
Absolutely. And I touched on it briefly with you that I actually learned British
Yes.
Sign Language, which of course is different from American Sign Language. I didn't actually get to I didn't want to become an interpreter, so I didn't follow that. But, it is an amazing thing. And for me, it absolutely opened up this extraordinary new world. And it just added so much more richness to my life, actually. But obviously, there are challenges. What were the challenges that you had to overcome working as an interpreter?
The challenges were mainly with access, with actually getting people who were hearing. It worked in the educational system, first off. So many instructors were opposed to having an interpreter in the classroom. They felt threatened, which is very interesting to me, but they felt like, I don't know if it was that the attention was being taken off of them, because it was a novel thing. Many of the students often paid attention to what I was doing. And it was clear to the instructor that that was one. So that was one. So it was education about accessibility for people who had differences. And that was another, like you said, enriching piece for me. I learned so much about how inaccessible things were for people who were deaf, and seeing things from a totally different perspective. And really got to understand that, which also can transfer to so many other areas that where people are marginalized for who they are. And so that was one. Another was also being accepted within the deaf community, because you're kind of like in between two worlds. You're not deaf, and yet you can sign. You're hearing, and yet here you are signing. So there was that piece of navigating those two worlds. That was a challenge. And the biggest one of all, though, was the education of the hearing employers, because they did not understand that people who were deaf are super capable of doing anything someone who is hearing can do.
Wow.
So,
Amazing. So let's talk about EFT now. So there'll be some people watching who have never heard of EFT, or some people that might have heard EFT but actually don't even know what it is. So how would you describe it, Pamela?
EFT, or emotional freedom techniques, is a scientifically proven modality that absolutely calms the fear center of the brain, and allows people to feel when they are in an emotional state where they're they're angry at maybe a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or frustrated or irritated. It absolutely helps to calm that to a level that then they can feel more at ease, see the issue for what it is, and have more resources. They're not in the fight or flight response any longer. For people that don't know, that's the stress response. And there's so much stress that goes on in our world today that we're not running away from tigers like our ancestors had to do. We're running away from paper tigers, deadlines, expectations, arguments, the pandemic, all of these things that aren't truly a threat to our survival. So that the EFT is a very simple, gentle, and super powerful way of calming that fear center, so then we can take the actions that serve us best.
So well put. I mean, it's an incredibly powerful tool. And also, it can look a bit strange, can't it? Let's face it, Pamela. It looks a bit like, well, then why would that work? But I'm really glad that you touched upon the fact that there is some science behind it, because, it's taken a long time for things like hypnotherapy to be kind of recognized and a bit more mainstream. So, there will be some people who think it's all just a bit woo-woo, So for people who think that, what do you say to them?
Well, do they know anything about acupuncture and acupressure? And that acupuncture, acupressure takes advantage of what's known as the meridian system in the body. And it's putting little needles in, and the people begin to feel better for whatever their ailments are. And EFT takes advantage of that same meridian system. That is how the energy travels on the body. And so we just tap on points. We don't use needles. We just tap on areas, just a few of them. In acupressure and acupuncture, there's like over 400. In tapping, the original tapping just touches on 9 points, meridian points, and they actually all connect to that fear center in the brain. And this has been scientifically shown. People who have studied it, like Peter Stapleton in Australia, and Dawson Church here in the US, although I think he's from the UK originally. They have done some super experiments on it and shown the efficacy of it, and shown with brain waves and EKGs all of the changes in the brain when we tap that actually occur, that actually calm those different centers in the brain.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like I've said, it's incredibly powerful. And actually, what I really love is that you can have absolutely no belief in it whatsoever.
Exactly.
It can still work. And,
exactly.
Yeah. And also for people who are really afraid of needles, EFT, it's a really brilliant thing to be using. And also, you can tap anywhere you like, anywhere, day or night, wherever you are, you can tap,
Mm-hmm.
whereas you might not have needles with you, or, So, yeah, exactly. So I know now that you actually work with your husband, Brad.
Yes.
And I just think that must take so much. That must really test a relationship to its core. So how do you avoid, Pamela, talking shop? And what do you each bring to that working relationship?
That is a great question. We do talk shop often. We actually set time aside each morning, and we do our own study and working and research together. When we are developing programs or work, my husband is much more technical than I am, much more detailed than I am. I tend to see the big picture, the big impact, where he tends to say, okay, we need to do this step, this step, this step. So I think it's a good complement with each other. When we do group programs together, we do workshops together where we introduce people to the EFT and other mind-body tools. We incorporate a lot of mind-body tools into our work. When we work with individuals, we work one-on-one. And we have our own styles, of course, of working with individuals. And it's quite interesting because we trust in the universe to send us each the people that we are most likely to work well with, that we have an affinity with. So I don't know if that answers totally your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you trust, you trust energy of the universe. Why would someone work with you, Pamela? What is it that you do you think, that is different?
Well, one of the things that's different is that we, like I mentioned, we incorporate other mind-body tools and techniques. Also, one of the things is that what I bring personally is that my history is very different from my husband's, but my history of not loving myself. And we both know that the ultimate goal is that for someone to truly care about themselves, to love themselves, to know that by loving themselves, they are actually contributing to the whole of humanity. And So that is our like overriding goal. When I work individually with someone, I'm a very gentle and very intuitive. Wherever they are is where they are, and we can pull things out. We can go slowly as they need to go. I do a lot of education on what is happening between the mind and the body. So people totally, by the time they've gone through our program, they understand that what they are thinking comes from their beliefs and then determines how their lives are lived. Just like I had mentioned before, that for me, that anger, that guilt, that shame, how that impacted everything in my life. That's what I want my clients to understand, is that when we hold on to all of that heavy stuff, then that is what is determining what's happening in your life now. So we absolutely help them. I do, my husband does, help them to get to a point where they can let go of that heaviness, feel more lighter, and love themselves. And then it's actually emotional freedom techniques. So it is that emotional baggage that drags us down, that holds us down and keeps us stuck. And what's so exciting about it is, Julie, is that what people end up realizing is that I am much healthier now that I don't have all this emotional crap going on. And they begin to see that their health and well-being is so tied to their emotions. And that gives them power that they don't have to go out and depend upon pills and surgeries. And not that those are not necessary at times, because they are, absolutely, and they're valuable at times, but not to the degree that we put all of our power into what's outside of us.
Absolutely. So they take ownership for themselves,
Yes.
and the way their life's turning out. Fantastic. And I also love the fact, Pamela, that you mentioned the link between, loving ourselves and making a difference to humanity, that there absolutely is a connection.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so many people right now in this day and age are truly scared. There's a lot of stuff going on. And the greatest thing that they can do for this whole thing is to look inward and begin to calm the self, to love the self, to just, feel that. Then it emanates out. That is going to make a difference in the world. We don't have to solve everything out there. We can't. We can only take care of this one person right here. And that's how we make a difference in the world.
Easier said than done, though, isn't it? Kind of loving the self. I mean, if anything, I personally, that's been one of the most challenging things I've ever had to deal with. So for anyone listening right now is thinking, what are you talking about, loving myself? Have you got any kind of advice or some simple tips that someone can kind of listen to and put into practice that would actually start to make a difference?
Yes, actually, there's a little process that I like to share with people, and I call it AHA, AHA, okay? And the first A stands for acknowledge and allow. When you're feeling that sense of heaviness, or you're feeling that like, everything is awful, oh my God, I said this again, and oh, I shouldn't have done that, and I shouldn't have done that, and you just stop and say, okay, I'm feeling what? I'm feeling stress. I'm feeling angry at myself. Okay, just acknowledge that emotion. Okay, that's what I'm feeling. Most of the time, we don't tune into what we're feeling because we've been conditioned to push our feelings away and to put on a happy face and all of that. So first off, acknowledge. The second one is honor it. All righty, I am frustrated, I'm angry, or whatever it is, I'm irritated. Yep, that's where I'm at right now. And that's not, and by honoring, it's not making it wrong. So often we make our, first off, we don't acknowledge how we feel. Then we make how we feel wrong. All right. It isn't wrong. We are human beings. We are intended to have emotions. And so when we make them wrong and try to push them away, they only get louder. So now we've acknowledged, we honor, yep, that's what's happening. And then the third one is just to allow it to move through you. Just breathe into it and allow it. Because once we've acknowledged it and honored it, it can move. Emotion is energy in motion. And so that's just a very little quick tip of being very gentle on yourself, of not making yourself wrong, of just acknowledging what's going on for you, not making it wrong, and then just allowing it to release if you can. And just doing this over and over, it becomes easier and easier to do.
I love that. I think that's absolutely brilliant advice. So simple, but actually put to practice, it can make all the difference. But also the fact that it's aha.
Yes.
Yes, it's so brilliant. Okay. So of all the things that you've done in your life, Pamela, what are you most proud of?
My children. I have to say it's my children. My husband and I have 3 grown children and 2 grandsons, and them too. And they are amazing, all of them, all 5 of them. All 3 of our children are in the health field. All 3 of them are follow nutrition. They went through the Institute of Integrative Nutrition in New York. All 3 of them do energy work. They are beings of light for others. And so I have to say that that's what I'm most proud of.
Wonderful. So when you're no longer on this planet, how would you like to be remembered?
Oh, wow. How would I like to be remembered? I'd like to be remembered as someone who inspired others in a gentle and kind way to love themselves.
Beautiful. It's been such a privilege talking to you today, Pamela. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you for having me.